Yeah, I wasn't expecting it, but I think it's just like, just respond, calm down, let your play do the talking. It is what it is. It's a physical game. Go make the free throw and then execute on offense. And I feel like that's kind of what we did, but, it is what it is, I guess. I don't know.
When you hear those words, you hear a player who has already accepted a very dark, unspoken reality about her profession. It is what it is. That is not just a passing comment. That is the sound of a generational talent, realizing that the league she single-handedly elevated to unprecedented financial heights is actively trying to break her down, physically and mentally. What started as a gritty welcome to the league narrative during her rookie season has mutated into something far more sinister and dangerous as we push deeper into the 2026 WNBA season. We are no longer talking about competitive fire or sending a message to a rookie. We are talking about a targeted, systematic physical assault on the golden goose of women's basketball, and it all culminated in a moment that brought the entire Indiana Fever organization and millions of fans worldwide to an absolute, terrifying standstill. To truly understand the absolute panic that erupted on April 30th during the preseason clash against the Dallas Wings, you have to rewind and look at the sheer, suffocating weight that Caitlin Clark carries on her shoulders every single time she steps onto the hardwood. The Indiana Fever are not just a basketball team anymore. They are a traveling circus, a global phenomenon, and the undisputed main event of the WNBA. The arenas are sold out, the television ratings are shattering records that stood for decades, and the financial valuation of the league has skyrocketed entirely because of the number 22 inches navy and gold. But with that unprecedented spotlight comes an equally unprecedented level of resentment from the shadows. There is a deep-seated, simmering frustration among veteran players. For years, they grinded in empty arenas for fractional pay, and suddenly, this young guard from Iowa arrives and instantly becomes the face of the sport. Whether they admit it on camera or not, that jealousy manifests itself on the court in the form of elbows, late contests, and blindside screens. They want to test her chin. They want to see if the poster child of the new era can actually survive the brutal, unforgiving trench warfare of professional basketball. This was the boiling cauldron of tension that the Fever walked into when they faced the Dallas Wings. It was supposed to be a standard preseason matchup, a chance to shake off the rust, integrate the new offensive sets, and get the legs ready for the grueling summer ahead. Gainbridge Fieldhouse was packed, buzzing with that familiar electric anticipation that only Caitlin Clark can generate. The first half was standard operating procedure. Caitlin was hitting deep logo threes, threading impossible needles through the Dallas defense, and making elite professional athletes look completely out of their depth. But you could feel the temperature rising. The defensive closeouts were getting a little too aggressive. The hands checking her off the ball were lingering a little too long. The Dallas Wings, much like every other team in this league, had clearly drawn a line in the sand. They were not going to be another highlight reel. And then came the third quarter, the moment that will be replayed, analyzed, and debated in sports media for the rest of the year. The Fever were initiating a half-court set. Caitlin, operating as the primary ball handler, passed the ball off and immediately began her standard marathon run through a maze of off-ball screens. This is where she is most dangerous, lurking on the perimeter, waiting for that microscopic window of space to launch a dagger. But waiting for her in the paint was Alana Smith. What happened next was not basketball. It was not a basketball play. It was not a standard physical contest, and it was certainly not an accident. As Caitlin curled around the screen, fully focused on the ball handler, Smith delivered a crushing blindside hit that had absolutely nothing to do with defending a play. It was a targeted collision. The sound of the impact echoed through the arena, but the silence that followed was deafening. Caitlin Clark went down hard. This wasn't a standard trip or a flop to draw a foul. She collapsed to the hardwood with a violent suddenness that immediately triggered every single alarm bell in the state of Indiana. She grabbed her knee. In the world of basketball, watching your franchise player grab their knee is the equivalent of watching a horror movie unfold in real time. Everything stops. The championship aspirations, the massive television deals, the endorsement campaigns, it all evaporates in an instant, replaced by a cold, suffocating dread. The Gainbridge Fieldhouse went from a roaring sea of 18,000 screaming fans to a morgue in a matter of seconds. You could hear a pin drop. The only sound was the sharp whistle of the referee and the frantic footsteps of the Indiana Fever medical staff sprinting off the bench. As the medical team surrounded her, the replay began to loop on the massive jumbotron overhead, and with every slow-motion angle, the reality of the situation grew darker. This was the exact nightmare scenario the Fever front office had been having cold sweats about since they drafted her. You simply cannot subject a human body to 94 feet of relentless physical harassment every single night and expect the joints and ligaments to hold up forever. The referees huddled around the monitor and quickly upgraded the foul to a flagrant one, officially acknowledging the excessive and unnecessary nature of the contact. But the penalty felt entirely hollow. A free throw and possession of the ball mean absolutely nothing if your generational superstar has a torn ACL. When Caitlin finally managed to get to her feet, visibly shaken and limping, head coach Stephanie White did not hesitate for a single microsecond. The decision was immediate, absolute, and non-negotiable. Caitlin was pulled from the game, escorted straight down the tunnel, and did not return. As she disappeared into the locker room, the shockwave of the incident hit the internet like a digital tsunami. Social media went into an absolute, unmitigated meltdown. Within minutes, the clip of the hit was everywhere. Analysts, former players, and millions of fans were utterly outraged. The narrative completely shifted. The conversation was no longer about whether the Indiana Fever could win the championship. The conversation was about whether the WNBA was going to allow its biggest star to be battered into an early retirement. Behind closed doors, the atmosphere inside the Fever locker room was thick with tension. The medical staff was conducting the initial stability tests on her knee, waiting desperately to see if there was structural damage. The front office executives were pacing the halls, their entire multi-million-dollar master plan hanging by a thread. But amidst the chaos and the panic, this terrifying incident forced a massive, uncomfortable reckoning within the coaching staff. Stephanie White and her assistants realized in that dark moment that their current strategy was fundamentally broken. They were complicit in putting Caitlin in harm's way. By forcing her to be the primary ball handler, by demanding that she bring the ball up the court against elite defenders who were instructed to hound her every single step, they were serving her up on a silver platter to the physical enforcers of the league. It was a suicidal game plan. The human body is not designed to absorb that level of targeted trauma over a grueling 40-game season. This realization birthed the most significant tactical pivot in the modern history of the franchise. The Indiana Fever had to completely rewrite their playbook overnight. They had to create a system that shielded their superstar without neutralizing her lethal scoring ability. The answer was a radical transition to a heavy off-ball offensive system. For a player like Caitlin Clark, who has literally commanded the basketball her entire life, who dictates the pace and flow of the game with the ball in her hands, this is a monumental shift. But it was no longer a matter of preference. It was a matter of sheer survival. The new master plan is brilliantly simple in theory, but incredibly complex to execute. The responsibility of breaking the full-court press and navigating the treacherous waters of the backcourt is being completely stripped away from Caitlin. That burden now falls squarely onto the shoulders of Kelsey Mitchell, arguably one of the fastest and most elusive guards in the league, alongside the dynamic playmaking hub of Aaliyah Boston and the gritty, fearless rookie sensation Raven Johnson. The Fever are essentially building a physical fortress around Caitlin. They are sending a very clear message to the rest of the league. If you want to play dirty, if you want to commit cheap fouls in the backcourt, you are going to have to waste them on our role players. You are no longer getting free shots at our franchise cornerstone. By weaponizing Caitlin off the ball, the Fever are drawing direct inspiration from the golden era of the Golden State Warriors and the way they utilize Steph Curry. Caitlin will now spend the majority of the half-court possession sprinting off double screens, utilizing baseline elevator doors, and forcing the defense to chase her through an absolute maze of bodies. Instead of dribbling the air out of the ball while absorbing hits, she will be catching the basketball in motion, already in a shooting pocket, completely unguardable. This system not only preserves her legs and her joints, but it also creates an absolute nightmare for opposing defenses who now have to communicate flawlessly through multiple screens just to keep her in their sights. It is a tactical masterstroke born out of absolute desperation. But while the coaching staff was busy reinventing the wheel on the whiteboards, the excruciating wait for a medical update continued. For 48 agonizing hours, the Indiana Fever organization went completely radio silent. No press releases, no tweets, no interviews. The silence was deafening, and it sent the rumor mill into overdrive. Fans were dissecting every single piece of cryptic information, bracing themselves for the devastating news of a season-ending surgery. The anticipation was building towards the Fever's next scheduled appearance, a highly anticipated exhibition matchup against the Nigerian national team on May 2nd. The entire basketball world was holding its collective breath, waiting to see if the face of the league would emerge from the tunnel in street clothes, or if, by some absolute miracle, she was going to lace up her sneakers. The atmosphere in the arena on May 2nd was completely different. It wasn't electric, it was anxious. The fans were sitting on the edge of their seats, their eyes glued to the tunnel. And then, the crowd absolutely erupted. There she was, number 22, fully dressed in her warm-up gear, stepping onto the hardwood. But the relief was only temporary. Warming up and shooting uncontested jumpers is one thing. Playing at the relentless, chaotic speed of live professional basketball is an entirely different beast. Everyone in that building knew that the first time she planted that knee hard, the first time she had to stop on a dime and change direction, would be the true test. What followed over the next 13 minutes of basketball was not just a return to the court, it was a psychological domination. Caitlin Clark didn't just look healthy, she looked utterly terrifying. She took the trauma of the Dallas game, the fear, the anger, the media circus, and she channeled all of it into an absolute masterclass of offensive basketball. She moved with a fluidity and a vicious, predatory aggression that completely erased any lingering doubts about her physical integrity. She wasn't just testing the knee, she was punishing the Nigerian defense. In just 13 minutes of floor time, she systematically dismantled their entire scheme, dropping 12 points with terrifying efficiency. She was pulling up from the logo with effortless mechanics, threading impossible, no-look passes through impossibly tight windows, and most importantly, she was completely devoid of hesitation. There was no wincing, no favoring the leg, no fear in her eyes. The Indiana Fever ended up obliterating Nigeria, 105-57. A complete and total blowout, but the final score was the least important metric of the night. The only thing that mattered was that Caitlin Clark walked off that court under her own power, smiling and looking like the most lethal offensive weapon on the planet. This phenomenal rapid-fire comeback proved an undeniable truth that the mainstream media often overlooks. Caitlin Clark's mental toughness is borderline psychopathic. We get so caught up in the logo threes, the flashy assists, and the highlight reels that we completely ignore the sheer, unadulterated grit it takes to survive in her position. To get leveled by a blindside hit, to feel that horrific twinge of panic in your knee, to listen to the entire world debate your durability, and then to step right back onto the hardwood 48 hours later and completely dominate your opponent requires a level of psychological armor that very few athletes possess. She simply refuses to be intimidated. She refuses to allow the physical enforcers and the jealous veterans of the WNBA to dictate the terms of her career. However, anyone who thinks this story has a happy ending is completely deluding themselves. The horrific injury scare against the Dallas Wings was a massive, blaring wake-up call, a deafening siren echoing through the halls of the Indiana Fever front office and the executive suites of the WNBA. Yes, the new off-ball strategy is a brilliant adaptation. Yes, having Kelsey Mitchell and Raven Johnson absorb the physical punishment in the backcourt will relieve a tremendous amount of pressure. But the target on Caitlin Clark's back has not disappeared. It has only grown larger. As the Indiana Fever start to look more and more like a legitimate, terrifying championship contender, the physicality from opposing teams is only going to amplify. Desperation breeds aggression. The regular season is going to be an absolute blood-soaked gauntlet. Every single coach in the league has analyzed the tape of that Dallas game. They saw her go down. They know that beneath the hype and the endorsements, she is still human, and they are going to test that reality every single night. They are going to test the structural integrity of that knee. They are going to violently test the Fever's new offensive system by fighting through those screens with zero regard for human safety. And perhaps most critically, they are going to test the referees. They are going to push the absolute limits of the rulebook to see just how much physical abuse the officials are willing to tolerate before they step in and protect the league's biggest asset. We are looking at a 2026 season that is going to be defined by a silent, brutal war of attrition. It will not just be a test of skill, shooting percentages, or tactical adjustments. It will be a pure, unadulterated test of survival. Can Caitlin Clark navigate this incredibly hostile, physically abusive environment without suffering a catastrophic injury? Will the WNBA finally step up and enforce strict, severe penalties for targeting, or will they continue to allow headhunting to mask itself as tough, gritty defense? And ultimately, will the strategic genius of this new off-ball system be the masterstroke that finally delivers a championship to Indiana? Or will the relentless, grinding physical toll of being the most hated and feared player in the league eventually prove to be too much for one body to endure? The Dallas Wings incident was not an anomaly. It was the opening salvo in what is shaping up to be a brutally long, incredibly dangerous campaign. Caitlin Clark has survived the first major strike, but the storm gathering on the horizon is darker and more violent than anything she has faced before. The rest of the league is coming for the crown, and they have made it crystal clear that they are willing to drag the game into the mud to take it from her. The stage is perfectly set for the most dramatic, high-stakes, and controversial WNBA season in history, and every single eye on the planet is locked onto Indiana to see who breaks first.